Okay, we're live.
Nice.
Welcome, everyone, to Wits End Podcast after a long sabbatical. There's been many things going on here and there and everywhere. But during our Bible conference last week, I had several people say they enjoy the podcast and they're thankful for it, and they want us to continue to do it. So, sorry, George. Sorry. I know you'd love to shut it down.
Hey, I'm the one who told you let's do it.
So we're having fun. Do you want to do a recap, or does anyone care? Does anyone really care about what's been going on in our lives?
I want to know where we're at in Australia and the Netherlands. That's really the
Oh, you mean the
amongst the Christian podcasts.
uh I know one thing. We're on the way up, baby. We are climbing through.
There's no other way.
We can't go any further down. That's true. Oh man. Yeah, so I do like podcasts. Occasionally I listen to them, and so I figured, hey, maybe we can be a help to other people. Somebody was talking to me about it, saying that out there in the podcast sphere that it's hard to find Bible believing materials and so forth. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it can be a help to somebody out there.
Yeah, that sounds about right. We're not we're not the kind of people to do this kind of stuff. It's not
What do you mean?
it's not in our DNA. Like our circles. It's not really in our DNA to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you're right. And why is that?
Maybe because we're like the inheritors of the fundamentalism that didn't go along with neo evangelicalism. So like we were made more separate. Anything that's kind of like culturally relevant, we're disconnected because we're afraid it's gonna pull us and somewhere left of center, like it did to the neo evangelicals or to the evangelicals.
Right.
Back then they were just called evangelicals.
Yeah, that's true. I can see that. Practice secondary separation. Not only do we separate ourselves, but we separate from people who refuse to separate.
That's right. We rightly divide people.
Yes. So, well, you gotta rightly divide people. Yeah, that's that. I see what you're saying. That makes sense. And I think for me, I'm just having fun doing what we're doing here. It's, I think conversation is needed because you have to find the right sweet spot. It can't just be, oh, that's weird stuff. Let's talk about weird stuff. And it can't all be dry because everybody already knows a lot of the things they're supposed to do. But sometimes it's just that encouragement of a friend or perspective that helps you, that lifts you up. Is thy heart right as my heart is with thy heart? Come with me and see my zeal for the Lord, brother.
That was
Hop
an odd
in
thing
the
that
chariot.
Joab said, huh? But I always thought that was kind of an odd thing to say. Like that's what you think is it? He's just showing him, like, look at me, look how right with God I am, look how zealous for God I am. Come along for the ride and watch me.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the kind of spirit you get from Joab?
I thought that was Jehu. What am I
Jehu,
saying?
forgive me. Yeah, from Jehu. Yeah.
Yeah,
you're definitely right. It's definitely Jehu.
Yeah, I think what he's saying is, I'm fired up, brother. The Lord said to provoke one another to love and to good works, and maybe that's just a verbal provoking to say, are you on fire for God? Like, I've seen it more with younger Christians, and definitely Jehu was he was like fired up, and then he kind of lost his zeal. and
Yeah,
ended up not so great. So
that's a good
I
way to put
understand
it.
what you're saying, but it's almost like a kid, a teen at youth camp, where they're like, I'm never gonna do this again, and I'm getting rid of all of my music, and I'm getting rid of this and that, and anybody with me type thing. And
Hmm.
I don't know. I think it can be good,
Well, the parallel
but
to like a younger kind of spirit is interesting because he did drive furiously. When the Watchman sees him, he says like the writing is like the writing of Geo, for he drives furiously, and like crazy kind of driving is more associated with like a younger person.
yeah, it reminds me of Peter. Though all men forsake thee, yet will I never forsake thee.
Mm, mm.
Just like a super confidence in. I just can never see myself ever doing anything different but doing the right thing. But that's kind of what when you're doing right and living for God and sold out, that you can't imagine ever going back. And then
Yeah,
when you're serving your flesh, you can never imagine being right with God again. It's so weird.
true, true.
You know what I mean? It's like either way, either way. Okay, well we gotta launch, brother. We gotta launch into
Go ahead,
Genesis 9.
let's go.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Take it away.
All right. Yeah. So we got to Genesis 9. We're out of the ark. Praise the Lord. Which is
Man, it's
which is
good.
great.
After
So we spoke
120 years in the ark.
after we spoke about the basis of government, which is like there's a gun at the end of government. At the end of the day, justifying government, so the introduction of capital punishment in a formal way, and so the Lord kind of devolves or delegates rather the rule of man to man. And now in Genesis chapter 9, verse 8, and God spake unto Noah and to his sons with him, saying, and I, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your seed after you. First time the word covenant is mentioned, by the way, which I think is really cool. And he tells them in verse 10, and with every living creature that is with you, of the fowl, of the cattle, and of every beast of the earth with you, from all that go out of the ark to every beast of the earth. It's kind of strange that he does a covenant with the creatures through us, I guess, as their federal head. And I will establish my covenant with you, neither shall all flesh be cut off anymore by the waters of a flood. Thank God. Mark Twain wanted to flood us again. Neither shall there any more be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token, so for a sign of a covenant between me and the earth. And it shall come to pass when I bring a cloud over the earth that the bow shall be seen in the cloud. And I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And the waters shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh. And just thought of it too. He destroys the world, then he makes a covenant. He destroys Egypt. So he destroys Egypt, he brings out a remnant, he makes a covenant. He destroys the world, he brings out a remnant, makes a covenant. That's interesting.
Hmm.
And so in verse 16 says, and the bow shall be in the cloud, and I will look upon it, that I may remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon the earth. So the covenant is still in effect here, it seems. And God said unto Noah, this is the token of the covenant, which I have established between me and all flesh that is upon the earth. So I got a table that I'd like to share to summarize kind of visual breakdown of what's involved here in the covenant. But before I do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I want to see your table.
Okay, and I want to write this down. Isn't that interesting? So he destroys. So I do this to get notes, right? So he just that's cool.
Yes, I'm here to not even to provide ideas. I'm here like I could be AI as far as you're concerned. What would you put? What kind of prompt would you put in for me? Respond to
No, no.
me as I really would. I would like to know what that would be. As a balding middle-aged man with very with uh, with not much of a life, but a lot of regrets about what he might have done in his life, and
Okay.
then respond to me in that way. I will be your AI response.
and makes a covenant.
Speaking of computers responding, I'll say this as you look for your table.
Yeah.
My dad, he would tell this story about years ago. He was walking in the mall back in the 80s, and he came across, I think it was Radio Shack had a display, because Radio Shack used to be in all the malls.
Radio
And
Shack, man. Does that
remember Radio
still
Shack?
exist?
And he no, they're dead. But he walked up and there was a computer, probably like a Tandy something or other. And he walked up and had like an MS-DOS prompt sitting there. And it probably had a little sign that said, "Hey, interact with me, interface with me." So he walked up and they said, "How are you doing?" That's what the prompt said. And so he typed in, I'm saved, into the computer. And the computer responded, "Is it because you're saved you come to me?" And so he loved that response. He thought it was so great. And he always would mention that. That was way back, the earliest versions of AI. Back in the early 80s.
What year was that? 80s.
It was probably 85, 86, something like that.
Wow. Back then. I'm going to have on soon on Council Maita, brother Jaakko Koponen. So I'll tell you a little bit about it. He found a way to, so he got given privileged access to ChatGPT, and he basically told me how to prompt it correctly, and he spent hours on this. That's his field. AI, IT is his field, and he spent hours on this. So he's given me the breakdown of how to correctly prompt it. You basically have to massage it through prompts to get the real truth of the data, and it's really, really interesting. Yeah. It's really interesting. I'm going to have him on soon so we can talk about that. He's in a very, very exclusive club, almost unbelievably exclusive, that has access to kind of the back door of ChatGPT. It's pretty cool. And he's a born-again Christian that loves the Lord. So I did find the chart. Let's see if I remember how to screen share. There you go. We're going to share the screen, entire screen. Et voila. There are my notes on Genesis. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Is that big enough to read?
I think so.
There we go. Some of our friends are going to be on the phones. So that's kind of a breakdown I wrote down to just help me understand exactly what the Lord is structuring there. So Noah's everlasting covenant has two sides. That's the title. And then the table is divided into two. So on the left part, you got God's part vis-a-vis man's part. So if we start like top left of the matrix, if you will, protection from wild beasts, so men can safely multiply. And this is what I find interesting, is that everything that the Lord gives as a commandment, it's spoken as just general directives, but they're actually all interconnected. So he tells them to bring forth and multiply, right? Well, you can't do that if the wild beasts are overrunning the planet. It's like when he brings in the Israelites into Canaan, he says, "I'm not going to destroy all the giants before you, but little by little, lest the beasts of the field multiply against thee." So there's a direct correlation between, I want you to multiply, and I'm going to put the fear and the dread of animals upon you, because if the animals aren't afraid, then you're going to have problems on your hand. Man's part, so the Lord says basically, I check back the animals. Your part, be fruitful, replenish the earth. If we go down to the second row, again, left side of the column, provision of adequate post-flood food, now including flesh, so men can multiply. So he says, I'm going to feed you. Your part in connection with this is just make sure you don't eat blood. And then the third row, as we go down, he ordains human government. He gives it power of capital punishment based on the fact that man is in God's image, so men can safely multiply. Because again, an orderly government protects you from people destroying each other, so you can have some semblance of a stable society, so the people can multiply and terraform the earth. The counterpart to that, man's part of this, so God's part is, I will set up human government. I'll delegate the authority to you. Your part is, you apply capital punishment, because God swore he wouldn't do it directly anymore. And so the consequence is no more flood of water to destroy the earth. Now, on the right side of that table is us failing to do man's part. So the Lord says, be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. When you look at things that Paul describes the last days, when the last days men shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits, doctrines of devils. One of the things he says is commanding to abstain from meats and forbidding to marry. Well, those commandments, he says, they're doctrines. So they're theological precepts that have their source in devils. Those devils are not idiots. Those particular commandments are given, I think, because they directly contravene the Noahic covenant, which is be fruitful and multiply. So if you forbid marriage, generally to humankind, you're gonna be breaking man's part of the covenant, which invites the judgment of God. And the judgment is you get devoured by beasts, and a lot of times, because the Lord had said, I'm going to put the fear of beasts on you. So you break your part, then I will put the fear of the beasts upon you. Sodomy, you're not being fruitful and multiply, abortions. So I think the Lord, from a legal standpoint, when mankind goes after commanded celibacy and sodomy and abortions, part of the issue there is not only is it a personal sin against God, we're breaking our part of the covenant with God, which invites the judgment. And so on down the list. He says, I'm going to provide food for you. You can eat everything. Just don't eat the blood. So how do the spirits get us to break the covenant? By forced vegetarianism or veganism. Of course, if that's your choice, that's fine. Romans chapter 14. But if you make it a doctrine, then you're breaking the Noahic covenant. The Catholic and Orthodox Mass, which gets you to eat the blood of God literally, vampirism, drinking blood of victims like in Islam and animism, human sacrifice, all that kind of stuff is you're breaking that stipulation of Noahic covenant. And so the judgment on the extreme right is we're going to be given blood to drink in Romans 16:6 because we didn't abstain from blood. And so in Revelation, forgive me, 16:6, the angel, he says, righteous art thou, O Lord, they've shed the blood of your prophets, so you're going to give them blood to drink. And then going down, God had given us capital punishment. When we abolish capital punishment and when we teach evolution, because capital punishment is predicated on the fact that man is created in the similitude of God. So you take away the similitude of God, you lose capital punishment, which is why evolution and the cancellation of capital punishment kind of come together in the same century. And so as a result, as the Lord introduces war and he destroys us as beasts, and according to 2 Peter, since we compared ourselves to beasts. And war, I think, makes up. I really think this is because the Lord says the blood defiles the land, and the land is not cleansed but by the blood of him that shed it. I really think the Lord tabulates those things. He's got angels, he's got recording angels, and I wouldn't be surprised if I get up to heaven and I walk into the archive room. I tell one of the angels, they take me to the room of archives, and you find out that the number of people killed in judgments of God equals the number of innocent victims that were killed and not avenged, or maybe some multiple, like maybe it's times 2 or times 7 or something like that. And so the ultimate consequences, this time, of course, it's going to be a flood of fire. So it's not going to be a flood of water, but it's going to be a flood of fire. So it's a outline of a structured covenant, and when mankind sins as a whole, we're actually breaking those lines of the covenant, and we're inviting a one-to-one kind of judgment, commensurate to the kind of sin that we committed as a race.
This is very good. I'm interested in the direct connection between disobedience and judgment, and if it's truly like 1 Timothy chapter 4, if this is obviously it serves the devil's purposes to teach these things contrary to God, but are the devils teaching this for the purpose of destroying mankind? For the purpose of inviting the judgment of God. So that I was thinking about the destruction of we call the demoniac, the man in the Gadarenes. What do they call them? The man with the devil.
The Gadarenes.
Yes, and how they said, "Send us into the swine," and when he commanded them to come out of him, he said, "Send us into the swine." and he allowed them to go into the swine. And obviously, the the beasts were completely destroyed as a result of that. But I'm there seemed like there's some type of connection there, and I'm trying to think of the judgment side. Yeah, the judgment side is what I'm really interested in investigating even more so, because I can definitely see these things as a direct contravening of God's commandments to them. I mean, those those seem to make a lot of sense to me, and that idea of the evolution and capital punishment, um, the abolition of capital punishment coming in together. It's very interesting
Yeah, the
because
capital punishment is grounded in the fact that we're made in the image of God. So you take away the grounding, then you take away the incentive for capital punishment theologically.
yeah, because what do people
Or
say?
the,
We how
yeah, the
dare we
justification for it. Yeah.
how dare we kill someone? Who do we think we are that we could kill someone? And it's and it's always interesting. It's never how dare that murderer kill someone.
Hmm.
The anger is almost always directed towards anyone that has a desire for wrath or vengeance or justice. It would be wrong for us to take this person's life. That's how movies present it. Here's this guy. Yeah, he had a fit of rage for a moment, and you're telling me you're going to
Mm-hmm.
take the rest of his existence away, that he's no longer worthy, he's no longer valuable enough to stay alive, and how narrow-minded and bigoted are you? And it's never, what about the innocent life that he took?
Yep.
So it's a
Well, when
glorification of man even in his sinful state rather than a judgment of man because he took the life of a someone made in God's image.
image, that's right. That's right.
That's a really good table.
Yeah,
Um,
we actually had that. Did we do that? Yeah, I think we printed that when we got invited to the political conference of the Conservative Party in Quebec. That was one of the things that we handed those out. We handed that table out, I think, if I remember
hmm,
correctly. It was pretty cool.
that's very good. Yeah, I was also thinking about um, the Lord set a reminder on his phone, so to speak, uh,
Yeah.
to not judge by putting. He said, "I will remember the covenant," and he says, "And I will look upon it that I remember the everlasting covenant between God." And those things we say, well, that's just God giving us an anthropomorphism so we can understand him better. But I mean, how condescending is that to say that God can't say what he says? He can only say what
Yeah.
we think that he says.
Yeah.
um, I mean, I don't know how that is to be understood that I may remember, but the Lord says I'm gonna do that bow. I'm gonna put that bow there so that I remember.
So he says. Um, we in theology it's called divine nescience. So basically, I didn't know there was a term for it until my friend has a PhD in open theology, um, and we had a really good conversation about this. I don't ascribe to open theology, and one of the solutions to me is nescience. So NE is non science knowledge, and it's this notion that the Lord participates. He participates in His creation, so He can exist simultaneously. Well, we get into like pretty complicated philosophy here, but the usual notion is that God is outside of time. That's the usual notion. Um, but even if you grant that, he can still participate in time. And so he can compartmentalize his knowledge and lock himself out of his omnipotent or omniscience, at least. And so you've got verses like in Second Chronicles that talk about the eyes of the Lord, which are seven. We find out later on in the Bible. There's this, the eyes of the Lord go forth to and fro in the earth to show himself strong on the behalf of them that put their trust in him, and on behalf of the righteous. So I think, and he's got the four spirits of heaven that are coming in and giving him reports about what's going on earth. So I think the Lord does experience um, acquisition of knowledge as he looks at the cloud and then he remembers. That doesn't negate the fact that on some other level, he's got in the background his omnipotence running, and he can tap into it anytime he wants. And so that's why I take those verses exactly for what they say. And it's not an issue for me that it doesn't limit the omnipotence or omniscience or omnipresence of God.
Well, and I mean, we see that in the incarnation. You have to grant that God limited himself.
Yeah, that's right.
And then you have to also grant that it says phrases like, what does it say? When Jesus, it says multiple times, Matthew, Mark, let's see, Matthew, Mark, and then John in chapter 4, John, over and over it says, when Jesus knew, when Jesus knew, when Jesus knew.
Right.
Why? Okay, so why couldn't it just said Jesus knew?
Right.
It says
Right.
when Jesus knew, because he had limited himself to live in time. And it is that word when that's a time word that tells us he's living in time.
Yep.
And so then to say that, well, Jesus is God, so therefore Jesus is the Father, all of the eternality of God is represented in human form, but we know that's not true. Because he said, I do nothing of myself, but my Father, I do what I see my Father do. And so he is working here on earth, and he is living in time like we are. And so while he was here, it's amazing, because then you have other people that it says when she knew, right? When he knew. Over and over again, you see this, and it's such a blessing to remember that God is experiencing on this earth. God can experience in that. It's almost like he is playing a video game, and in the video game, he adopts the rules of the game, and he's playing that game, so to speak, just like everybody else is playing that game. And yet he is not the game. He's outside of the game, but he is
Right.
operating according to those rules.
That's really cool. I'm getting some good ideas here, because you were basically charging God with failure to communicate clearly. Because all those guys, you read those passages, and they're all like, "Well, no." So most Christians in the world, forget about like the academic class. Most Christians, they open up their Bible, they read that, they believe it, they move on. They don't break their heads with the philosophy of it, like how does God remember? Like they might wonder here and there, but you kind of almost have like this kind of like instinctive understanding of it, and then you move on. And then the scholars come along and say, "Oh, no, you don't misunderstand. God is just speaking morphologically, so He can speak on your level, so you can better understand." Yeah, but you're correcting all of our understanding. So you're saying His effort to speak more clearly has failed, so that we all have misunderstood. And now you want to come and clarify it. So He failed. The very fact that you're trying to correct our understanding, you're saying that God's effort to speak in a way we understand has failed.
Yes, and his communication is worse than that he failed. It's worse that he failed in communication. He's actually actively deceiving us. He's telling us something that is not true, so
Right.
that we
Yes. Right. He doesn't mean what he's saying. Yeah.
which what does what? While it's meant to help us understand God, it actually distances us from God, because
Yeah.
why would God lie to us?
Yeah.
Why would God say something he didn't mean?
Yeah.
Are we that stupid that we can't understand? If we're that stupid, why did God even try to communicate with us? And if he did communicate with us in ways that he did not mean, then what is anything that God's word says?
Yeah.
What does it mean? Can we trust anything that he said?
Then that still leaves, that's different than phenomenal language, like when the Bible says like about the sun rising. So he can still speak in language, because, and here's why that's different. I can actually believe that the sun doesn't literally rise, that the Earth is rotating, but I still speak of the sun rising because we all understand each other. So I get that when it comes to like physical creation, you adapt the language to the observer's point of view, which in modern physics is perfectly acceptable. But this is something that has to do with the character of God. And now God is telling me something that's not even true about himself. And I'm walking away with a mistaken notion about God. That's just, that can't be. I can't accept that.
Yeah, and even in that concept of, well, the sun rises, it does rise because of gravity in our eyes, in our world, in our culture. I'm sorry, in our atmosphere, because of gravity, there
Right.
is up and
Phenomenally.
there
Yeah,
is
that's
down,
right. Yes, correct. Yeah, you're describing
and
something as you see it. Yeah.
so the sun was lower, and now
True.
it's you know what I mean? It's like, okay, well, up is not up, down is not down. Well, from an outside perspective, it's different, but from my perspective, yes, it is. It
Correct.
was here, and now it's here.
Now it's there. That's right.
And that, but that, does that truly describe the character of the sun? No, it describes my perspective on the sun.
That's right.
I can see what you're saying with that.
Yeah. And your perspective is still right.
Right. And I don't know how you, but I don't know how you can do that with this idea of God remembering,
Right. Exactly.
because why would God isn't doing this, and he's not saying, I'm doing this so that you remember anything.
That's interesting here.
He's saying, I'm doing it so that I remember it. And where is he? I mean, why does he have to have anything to remember? Well, maybe because he knows who he's dealing with. And at some point, he might just get ticked off and say, this is it, man. This is it.
Yeah. Well, so yeah. So quickly, Nehemiah says, "Remember me." So obviously, Nehemiah must have understood this anthropomorphologically, because he's saying, "Remember me, God." Nehemiah is
Mm-hmm.
not an idiot. He's very educated, probably from the line of Judah, and governor, very accomplished man in the court of Ahasuerus. So, and yet Nehemiah still speaks like the regular believer speaks. And yes, so about the rain, we think of rain as a blessing and a mercy, because if it doesn't rain, we don't eat, and that's true. But it's only a mercy because God has found a way to weave mercy into the judgment. But actually, rain from heaven is a terrifying, terrifying thing. It's judgment. And if you think about it, still till this day, if it doesn't stop raining, everybody's in trouble. We die. You get mudslides and monsoons. If the Lord turns the water on, doesn't turn it off for like 6 months, right, globally, what would it'd be cataclysm. So
Mm-hmm.
actually, from the pre-flood perspective, water falling from heaven is a terrible, scary thing. It's a judgment. It's not an act of mercy. And so the Lord is basically, it seems that rain still has that character, because it wasn't in the original design of God to water the earth. It was via a mist. And so it seems that the Lord still, those waters start gathering, man, it starts pouring. And it's like the Lord has to remember to turn off the faucet.
I think we're also afraid of God making a mistake.
Yeah.
That we run and say, oh, God, there's no way in the world that God could ever make a mistake, because if we're not careful, we're saying because God doesn't do anything. It's all in the extreme. God, it's already done. Everything's already done. And so therefore nothing ever stimulates him.
Correct.
He doesn't say, that's great. And what kind of a person is never stimulated? A person who has PTSD, or a person who is jaded, cynical, calloused, has been through, I don't know what. We're getting some requests for you to bring your microphone in.
Yeah, it always happens on here on this stream, but I'll try to
Oh,
speak
really?
more into the mic. Yeah, lean into the mic.
I could probably have raised your microphone up if I had known that earlier. Yeah.
Can you still do that now?
Let me see here.
Output volume. This does not affect what I guess. I've got it at max on my side. I think it was it Aristotle? Somebody, one of those guys, envisioned God as a perfectly contemplative God. He only contemplates all the time, because God cannot do anything, otherwise he's no more God. Which kind of odd to me, because even contemplation is an act that involves time. But the God of the Bible, the God that I worship, my dad is not a Buddhist monk sunk somewhere in the universe that's in a constant state of contemplation. I guarantee you. Who said that God is always in a state of contemplation? Yeah, Aristotle. That's it. No, I can't hear you. No, I can't hear you. Oh, you're muted.
Testing.
Yeah,
1,
I hear
2,
you now.
3. Okay,
Yeah.
we're back. We're back. Don't worry, all our fans have been freaking out. But yeah, I thought it was Plato, but Aristotle. The idea was
Yeah.
that everything that we see physically is a knockoff version of the real thing somewhere. Like somebody creates a chair because they have in their mind this idea of a chair, and it exists somewhere. The perfect thing exists somewhere. And there's some truth in that. There's the physical material world and there's a spiritual world. But remember, I'm just looking up remember. Hezekiah said that.
Hezekiah said
Remember,
that too. Yeah.
I beseech thee, how I have
Nehemiah,
walked
remember
before thee in truth.
David probably too in the Psalms.
Yeah, he said, Lord, remember David and all his afflictions. Remember the word unto thy servant, upon which thou hast caused me to hope.
No,
Remember
God doesn't
me, O
remember
Lord,
anything,
with the favor.
which thou hast shown unto thy people, or something like that. Yeah. Yeah, Aristotle's view in Book 12, Lambda of his Metaphysics, he describes God as the unmoved mover, pure actuality without potentiality, the final cause of all motion, eternal and unchanging, always engaged in thinking, specifically thinking about thinking. Quote, the best life is that of contemplation, and the unmoved mover must therefore always be in such a state, which is Eastern mysticism adapted to the Greek Japhethetic mind.
It's crazy. It's crazy because the idea of actuality without potentiality, it's like we all should just be in a deep freeze somewhere.
Yeah, that's right.
And that same the Buddhist mindset that says the only reason why you have pain is because you have desire. And so stop the desire and you won't have any pain. Just be frozen like in a cryogenic state, and that's the best happiness you can possibly hope for. But what's the difference between that and saying, I wish I'd never been born?
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess
like Job.
it's the same thing. I wouldn't have any pain if I'd never been born.
That's what they're aiming for. That's where they're aiming. Nirvana means it's something like blowing out a candle. That's what nirvana means. Blown out.
Really?
Yeah. Imagine. I mean, that's got to be of the devil. He's directing you towards extinction. Yeah.
Yeah, and what it is, I think it's a nihilism. It's nihilism based on ego. If I can't have what I want, I don't want to exist. It's the same thing that Jonah said. I've been studying on Jonah. He's talked about, it would be better for me. It's better for me to die than to live. He's the one that said, "Hey, throw me overboard." It wasn't God's idea, and God. He says in Jonah 2, and he's praying in the whale's belly. He says, "Thou hadst cast me into the deep, into the sea," and the Lord's like, I mean, in a sense, yeah, the Lord determines what happens after we die, but God's not the one that threw him into the water. God's not the one that told him to kill himself. God told him to go to Nineveh. How do you say Nineveh?
The way we in Arabic?
Yeah.
Ninawa.
Doesn't help.
The V is a W. So the Hebrews
Nina
would have said it
what?
with a W too. Ninwa.
What is it?
It would have been Ninwa. Yeah.
Ninwa. I like it. Sounds like a ninja, some type of a ninja name. Oh man, yeah, it's where did we go? Wits End, baby. We're back.
So,
We're back. Okay, anything else you want to say about the bow and the covenant?
no, that's pretty
Why
much
do
it. You get a bow at the end of the scriptures too, around the throne, at the very end.
Mhm.
You know, John sees a bow around the throne. So I've always wondered why. It's it's got to be thrown because it gets introduced in Genesis 9, and you still have a bow around the throne when John sees it. So that must have been an addition to the throne, right?
You
Which
know,
tells you that even the throne, the decoration in heaven changes.
why? What do you mean?
Because the throne, the bow is introduced. I mean, it's technically a phenomenon associated with rain coming down from the sky, which you would not have had before when mist was rising. And so, if if the bow is a post-creation creation, it's a post-creation addition. Then when you have the bow around the throne of God, I'm thinking from an interior design point of view now. It's like that tells me that it wasn't there at some point, and then because of the change, it's a little bit like when something happens in government and you pull down a particular flag, you put up another color flag to signify uh, you're signaling out uh, you're signaling out some kind of new message relevant to the new situation at hand. And so it seems like the Lord does the same thing. You would not have had a rainbow on the throne before until the rainbow was introduced in Genesis 9. And lo and behold, now you get a rainbow on the throne. So I imagine that there was a time when the rainbow was not part of the decor of the throne room, and it becomes part of the decor of the throne room after Genesis 9, which then tells me that even up there, the the aesthetics are changeable too, which is kind of cool than have the same throne room always looking exactly the same for all eternity.
Well, I can see that, but wouldn't here's another thought. What if it was the bow that was behind his throne is now also represented on the earth? Because he said, "I do set my bow in the clouds."
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying. So I was kind of trying to preempt that a little bit by saying that the bow is created. It's a phenomenon it's an accidental phenomenon, if you will. It's incident, or I should say, incidental. It's incidental to rain falling from the sky and the light coming at a certain angle, refracting at a single angle, and then we see that. So that it's not like it's a substance that's pre-existing that then the Lord introduces. And he could still be, you can still say it's my rainbow if you're introducing it on the spot. I mean, it's not a huge thing, but it's just interesting to think about.
Hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting. Let's see here. So, I was looking up rainbow, and the process is called dispersion. Um, white light gets split apart, so you see all
Oh,
the different,
dispersion. Okay.
and then also,
Is refraction involved? Yeah, it's involved. Hello? I don't know if we're still live. So, Brother John. So, dispersion and refraction. So, I'm going to pick it up and wait for him to come back. And here, let's chat GPT. Explain how the rainbow appears in the sky. I was going to tell you, excellent question, because the engineers have prompted it to basically give you compliments every time you ask a question. As the sunlight enters the raindrop, it refracts, so which means bends, and disperses into its component colors, red to violet. This happens because different wavelengths colors bend at slightly different angles. The light reflects off the inside back surface of the raindrop. As light exits the drop, it refracts again, separating the colors even more. Each color leaves the drop at a slightly different angle. Red light exits at about 42 degrees, Violet light exits at about 40 degrees. Only certain drops send light to your eye at the correct angle, so you see a circle of colors, though often only semicircle is visible due to the ground blocking the bottom. The 42-degree angle from your eyes creates a cone of vision. The rainbow appears where that cone intersects with the rain. So no two people see the same rainbow. Each person sees the one made by different raindrops aligned at the correct angle. What? That is cool, man. Ha. Yes, but bro. So are you guys still with us? If you can let me know. If we're still live, I can't tell. You know what? There is a way I can tell. Let me go check on YouTube. Brother John reaches wit's end. He's like, forget this. Yeah. Still alive. All right, guys. Well, I'll can I leave? If I leave, the live is still on. Lost you. Oh, he's still on. Lost you. All right. He says, I'm the one who lost you. Okay. All right, I'll leave. I don't know what happened.